He is not jumping at this opportunity. His first feeling was one of awe that he had actually, in his mature years, stolen a tricycle and pedaled Lorraine all over the étoile between the small hours and dawn. In retrospect, it was a nightmare. Locking out Helen didn't fit in with any other act of his life, but the tricycle incident did. It was one of many. How many weeks or months of dissipation to arrive at that condition of utter irresponsibility? He tried to picture how Lorraine had appeared to him then. Very attractive. Helen was unhappy about it, though she said nothing. Yesterday in the restaurant, Lorraine had seemed trite, blurred, worn away. He emphatically did not want to see her, and he was glad Alex had not given away his hotel address. Okay, he describes Lorraine when he sees her yesterday um, at the restaurant. He says she seemed trite, blurred, worn away. Blurred, all right? I say this because it's almost like Lorraine is a ghost from his past who's haunting him because he's turned over this new leaf of not being an alcoholic, but you got Lorraine trying to chase him down like, Charlie, come back to your past. I kind of like talking to a camera. Okay. He tried to, and I read that, okay. He emphatically did not want to see her, and he was glad that Alex had not given away his hotel address. It was a relief to think instead of Honoria, to think of Sundays spent with her and of saying good morning to her and of knowing she was there in his house at night, drawing her breath in the darkness. At 5, he took a taxi and brought presents for the Peters. A piquant cloth doll, a box of Roman soldiers, flowers for Marion, big linen handkerchiefs for Lincoln. He saw when he arrived in the apartment that Marion had accepted the inevitable. She greeted him now as though he were a recalcitrant member of the family rather than a menacing outsider. So when he comes in the next time, she's a little less mean to him. He's more like the black sheep of the family as opposed to the guy who killed my sister. So it's mildly better. Honoria had been told she was going. Charlie was glad to see that her tact made her conceal her excessive happiness. Only on his lap did she whisper her delight at the question, "When?" before she slipped away with the other children. He and Marion were alone for a minute in the room, and on an impulse he spoke out boldly. Family quarrels are bitter things. They don't go according to any rules. They're not like aches or wounds. They're more like splits in the skin that won't heal because there's not enough material. I wish you and I could be on better terms, Marion. Some things are hard to forget, she answered. It's a question of confidence. There was no answer to this, and presently she asked, When do you propose to take her? So when she says it's a question of confidence, she's like, if you can prove to me that you're not an alcoholic anymore, fine, then I'll trust you again. Sorry. When do you propose to take her? As soon as I can get a governess. I hope the day after tomorrow. Oh, that's impossible. I've got to get her things in shape, not before Saturday. He yielded the point. Coming back into the room, Lincoln offered him a drink. I'll take my daily whiskey, said Charlie. It was warm here. It was a home. People together by a fire. The children felt very safe and important. The mother and father were serious, watchful. They had things to do for the children, more important than his visit here. A spoonful of medicine was, after all, more important than the strained relations between Marion and himself. They were not dull people, but they were very much in the grip of life and circumstances. He wondered if he couldn't do something to get Lincoln out of his rut at the bank. A long peal at the doorbell. The bon à tout faire passed through, and went. Bon à tout faire is I don't want to say a servant, but what am I looking for here? A guy that works for you, a servant. The bon à tout faire passed through and went down the corridor. The door opened upon another long ring, and then voices, and the three in the salon looked up expectantly. Lincoln moved to bring the corridor within his range of vision, and Marion arose. Then the maid came back along the corridor, closely followed by the voices which developed under the light into Duncan Schaeffer and Lorraine Quarles. They were gay, they were hilarious, they were roaring with laughter. For a moment Charlie was astounded, unable to understand how they ferreted out the Peterses addressed. Ah, ha, 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 ha! Duncan wagged his finger roguishly at Charlie. Ah, ha, 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 ha! They both slid down another cascade of laughter, anxious and at a loss. Charlie shook hands with them quickly and presented them to Lincoln and Marion. Marion nodded, scarcely speaking. She had drawn back a step toward the fire. Her little girl stood beside her, and Marion put an arm about her shoulder. With growing annoyance at the intrusion, Charlie waited for them to explain themselves. After some concentration, Duncan said, We came to invite you out to dinner. Lorraine and I insist all this cagey business about your address got to stop." Charlie came closer to them, as if to force them backwards down the corridor. "Sorry, but I can't. Now tell me where you'll be, and I'll phone you in half an hour." This made no impression. Lorraine sat down suddenly on the side of a chair, and focusing her eyes on Richard, cried, what a nice little boy. Come here, little boy." Richard glanced at his mother, but did not move, with a perceptible shrug of her shoulders. Lorraine turned back to Charlie. "Come and dine. Sure your cousins won't mind, see you so solemn. Or solemn." "I can't," said Charlie sharply. You two have dinner, and I'll phone you." Her voice became suddenly unpleasant. "All right, we'll go. But I remember once when you were hammered on my door at 4 a.m. I was good enough of a sport to give you a drink. Come on, Dunk." Still in slow motion, with blurred, angry faces, with uncertain feet, they retired along the corridor. With uncertain feet, that's a double clue. Uncertain feet means they're not really walking straight. In other words, this whole thing, they kind of probably smelled of alcohol, so they knock on the door, barge their way in past the maid, and smelling of alcohol, start talking to the kids and loudly vociferating. So it makes Charlie look bad because it makes him look like he's still hanging out with these people. But back to my symbolic thing from earlier, that Lorraine was blurred, and again he uses the word blurred there, still in slow motion with blurred, angry faces and uncertain feet. If you think of a ghost, ghosts never have feet. They kind of float above the ground. So with uncertain feet could also be kind of symbolic to both of them being ghosts from his past. "Good night," Charlie said to them. "Good night," responded Lorraine emphatically. When he went back into the salon, Marion had not moved. Only now her son was standing in the circle of her other arm. Lincoln was still swinging Honoria back and forth like a pendulum from side to side. What an outrage!" Charlie broke out. "What an absolute outrage! Neither of them What an absolute outrage!" Neither of them answered. Charlie dropped into an armchair, picked up his drink, set it down again, and said, "People I haven't seen for 2 years, having the colossal nerve—" He broke off. Marion had made the sound, in one swift, furious breath, turned her body from him with a jerk, and left the room. Lincoln set down Honoria carefully. "You children go in and start your soup," he said. And when they obeyed, he said to Charlie, "Marion's not well. She can't stand shocks. That kind of people, they make her really physically sick. Well, I didn't tell them to come here. They wormed your name out of somebody. They deliberately... Well, it's too bad. It doesn't help matters. Excuse me a minute." So now everything is in jeopardy because these two knuckleheads came barging into the house and drunk. Marion thinks, oh yeah, Charlie's going to go meet up with them and get drunk again. That's what he's been... So all of a sudden she completely disbelieves everything he's been saying. It's all been blown on account of these two ghosts from the past. Left alone, Charlie sat tense in his chair. In the next room he could hear the children eating, talking in monosyllables, already oblivious to the scene between their elders. He heard a murmur of conversation from a farther room, and then the ticking bell of a telephone receiver picked up, and in a panic he moved to the other side of the room and out of earshot. In a minute Lincoln came back. "Look here, Charlie, I think we'd better call off dinner for tonight. Marion's in bad shape." "Is she angry with me?" "Well, sort of," he said, almost roughly. "She's not strong, and—" "You mean she's changed her mind about Honoria?" "She's pretty bitter right now. I don't know. Phone me at the bank tomorrow." "Well, I wish you'd explain to her. I never dreamed those people would come here. I'm just as sore as you are." "Oh, I couldn't explain anything to her now." Charlie got back up. He took his coat and hat and started down the door. Charlie got up. He took his coat and hat and started down the corridor. Then he opened the door of the dining room and said in a strange voice, "Good night, children." Honoria rose and ran around the table to hug him. "Good night, sweetheart," he said vaguely, and then, trying to make his voice more tender, trying to conciliate something, "Good night, dear children." So this is part 5 and the conclusion. Charlie went directly to the Ritz bar with the furious idea of finding Lorraine and Duncan, but they were not there, and he realized that, in any case, there was nothing he could do. He had not touched his drink at the Peterses, and now he ordered a whiskey and soda. Paul came over to say hello. "It's a great change," he said sadly. "We do about half the business we did. So many fellows I hear about back in the States lost everything. Maybe not in the first crash, but then in the second. Your friend George Hart lost every cent, I hear. Are you back in the States?" "No, I'm in business, in Prague." "I heard you lost a lot in the crash." "Oh, I did." But he added grimly, But I lost everything I wanted in the boom. Selling short. Something like that. In other words, Charlie has already resigned himself to not getting Honoria back. We think, oh man, maybe there's some hope. Maybe Marion will let him have her back. But he knows. He knows he's not getting her back. And when he says, but I lost everything I wanted in the boom, now it's kind of a boom. It's better economic. It's not maybe necessarily a boom, but now that the economy has improved a little bit, he says, but I lost everything I wanted in the boom, which is right now, I just lost my daughter. He doesn't come out and tell that to the bartender, but that's what he means. And Paul says selling short, which is a stock market term. And he says, yeah, something like that, meaning it can be taken two ways. It's a stock market term, but if you sell someone short, it also means you don't give them enough credit. And Marion's not giving him enough credit that he can take care of his daughter. Again, the memory of those days swept over him like a nightmare. The people they had met traveling, then people who couldn't add a row of figures or speak a coherent sentence, the little man Helen had consented to dance with at the ship's party who had insulted her 10 feet from the table, the women and girls carried screaming with drinks or drugs out of public places, the men who locked their wives out in the snow because the snow of 29 wasn't real snow. If you didn't want it to be snow, you just paid some money. He went to the phone and called the Peters' apartment. Lincoln answered. I called up because this thing is on my mind. Has Marion said anything definite? Marion's sick, Lincoln answered shortly. I know this isn't altogether your fault, but I can't have her go to pieces about it. I'm afraid we'll have to let it slide for 6 months. I can't take the chance of working her up to this state again. I see. I'm sorry, Charlie. He went back to his table. His whiskey glass was empty, but he shook his head when Alex looked at it questioningly. In other words, he says no. So his whiskey glass is empty. He finished his whiskey, but Alex says, another one? And he says no. So he's going to stick to his one drink. Alex looked at it questioningly. There wasn't much he could do now except send Honoria some things. He would send her a lot of things tomorrow. He thought rather angrily that this was just money. He had given so many people money. No, no more, he said to another waiter. What do I owe you? He would come back someday. They couldn't make him pay forever, but he wanted his child, and nothing was much good now, beside that fact. He wasn't young anymore, with a lot of nice thoughts and dreams to have by himself. And he was absolutely sure Helen wouldn't have wanted him to be so alone. Sad ending. Disillusioned, yes. So that's the conclusion of the story. It's a very unsatisfying conclusion. He doesn't get his child back. And a lot of, if we had more time, or if I had a better way to present it to you, a lot of times when we read this story, I ask students to write an extra part 6 and tell me what happens in 6 months or in the next day or whatever. Some kids say Charlie goes and steals Honoria, or some kids say that he calls the waiter back over and has a couple more drinks. But I'm not going to make you do that. Just do your... hopefully you understood kind of the ending there, that Charlie doesn't get her back and it's due to the ghosts out of his past. So now you've got to do your note sheet. If you have questions, feel free. I tried to stop. I threw a couple foreshadowings, a little symbolism at you. You can figure out the other stuff, conflicts, Charlie versus Marion, Charlie versus himself, Lincoln versus Marion. So there's definitely enough conflict there to get that done. And once you're done with that sheet, do your 4 questions and you're good for the week. All right. I miss you guys. I miss actually doing this live face-to-face. I really, really hope we can get back together on May 15th. I don't know if that's going to be possible, but, you know, I'm hoping and praying. All right. Take care, guys. Miss y'all. Oh, have a good weekend.